And welcome to the special edition of Hannity. And tonight for the hour, I will be joined by one of the most talked about elected officials in the country, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who earlier this week released his brand new autobiography. It's called An American Son. And he is here in studio. And you'll also hear later from his wife and his kids. They're seated right there in our studio audience. But first, we welcome the senator from the great state of Florida. How are you, Senator? Good to see you.
Thank you.
Senator Rubio.
Thank you.
You know, I learned much about you in this book. And one of the things you really highlight is how difficult your grandparents and the life that they had, the life of your parents, and how fortunate you are. And you had even at one point in the book said, I'm not half the man my grandfathers were. Yeah. My father was. Yeah. You had doubt at one point. Tell us about their lives.
Well, first of all, I think that there's this misconception that the immigrant story is one of instant success, and it's not in this country, very rarely. In fact, many instances, people come and work all their lives and barely get ahead more than where they were when they got here. But what they do is they're able to leave their kids with every opportunity they didn't have. Now, in my parents' case, when they first got here, they were discouraged for a number of years. In fact, thought about going back to Cuba when initially people thought Fidel was actually going to be a good thing. Ultimately, they had to settle here and accept it and accept that this was their new life. Very grateful to this country for that opportunity. And because of their hard work, because of their sacrifices, they were able to give me the chance to do all the things that they had to give up on for themselves.
You know, to me, it was the quintessential American story. You talked about your mom. She wanted to be an actress, and she had to settle for being a maid for most of her working life. You talk about your father. He had other aspirations, but he was a bartender for, 70 years? For most of his adult life, or a big part of his adult life. And you even have a picture in the book about your dad. He wanted to be a business owner. Tell us what their goals for you were.
To be whatever it is I wanted to be. They never had a specific job in mind. They wanted me to have dreams, and they wanted me to pursue those dreams and to have the real chance to do it. And I think that was true for me, and it was also true for my brother and my two sisters. That's what they wanted for us. And, you know, one of the things the book forces you to do when you sit down and you have to research your parents and who they were and where they came from and how their journey here began, you learn, you meet these people you've never met before. You realize that your parents were once your age, and when they were your age, they had hopes, they had dreams, just like you did. And for some parents, it becomes impossible. In the case of my parents, the circumstances that they faced coming here, a new country, didn't know anybody, didn't know the language, didn't have much of an education. But the purpose of their life became, I want my kids to be able to do all the things we weren't able to do. Whatever their dreams are, that's what we wanted to do. It was never to be a senator or to be an actor or to be an athlete. It was whatever we desired. And I think that is really a testament to America.
You talk about the night that you were elected senator and you watched your mother walk up the stairs.
Yeah.
Just before you gave your speech. Tell everybody about that.
You know, that night was her birthday. And I thought about what a different place that was from where she was just 3-4 decades before. My mom was born into a family that struggled. You know, my grandfather actually did okay for a while, and overnight he lost his job running one of the railroad stops in Cuba and was thrown into poverty because he was a disabled man. And in a rural Cuba in the 1940s and 30s, there was no unemployment, there was no welfare, there was no food stamps. What there was is you got up in the morning and you got any work you could find in the hopes of getting enough money that day to feed your kids. And he was disabled, so there wasn't a lot of work around for a disabled man back in that time, as you can imagine. He struggled. And I thought about how far removed that was from where we were that evening, where I rose to a very, distinguished position and an honorable one in the greatest nation in all of human history. And I just thought what a testament that was to my grandfather, to my mother, and to this country.
You talked about your father had died 2 months prior to the night you became senator, but you said he died believing you would win.
Yes, I think, well, he got to vote in the primary, and I think he knew at that point that we had kind of turned the corner on that race. And I like to tell people my dad did see what happened that night. He just didn't see it on television. He saw it, and he had better seats. He had better seats. And, in so many ways, again, my dad was, I'll tell you, he was obsessed with your show. He would TiVo it every night or DVR the Hannity show every night because he thought I was on every night. And I told him, no, I'll let you know when I'm going to be on. And
now, why are you trying to take away viewers from me?
Well, I'm sure they get your show where he is now too. But my point is that he wasn't a political guy. I mean, he wasn't in terms of someone that loved politics and followed. He cared about it. And he certainly never pushed me in that direction. But he showed his pride in the attention he paid, especially at the end of his life. And my mom would talk about, he had a Fox on 24/7 just in case I came up for 30 seconds in some interview somewhere. So I think he was proud of what we accomplished because, we were his kids, and all parents are proud of what their kids accomplished. But I talk in the book about when I first ran for office in the city of West Miami. And that's a very small city, so the way you run there is you knock on doors. You go door to door. And it was during that time, going into the living rooms of my neighbors, a lot of elderly Cuban Americans, that I got to know who I really was and who my generation was. And invariably those conversations turned to when they were young, and the hopes and dreams they once had for themselves, and how that was lost to them because of history. And it became the purpose of their lives to give their children and the grandchildren every chance they didn't have. In essence, what gave their life meaning at the end of their lives, what was their statement that they mattered, that they'd been here, was what we were now able to do in our own lives or through the lives of their kids. And I think it was the first time that I really began to understand that my generation of Cuban Americans were the heirs of two generations of unfulfilled dreams.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I've been going through Ancestry.com, and the things, my grandfather in 1940 earned $600 in this country, came to the country at the early part of the last century. It's fascinating, you know, what you learn about them and how we really stand on their shoulders, on the shoulders of our grandparents, great-grandparents, and our parents. You even told a story, an interesting background about your grandfather from a broadcaster standpoint, is that part of his job was to read the news in a factory where they were rolling cigars so that it would keep them working.
The early part of the book details my family's history back to the birth of my grandfather in 1899, when the U.S. still basically governed Cuba up until 1902. My grandfather, when he was born to a large rural family, there were a lot of kids, and one of the reasons why they have a lot of kids is to help work the farm. But my grandfather was stricken with polio at a very young age, so he lost the use of one of his legs. He couldn't work the farm, so he was the only one of his siblings that got sent to school, and he learned how to read. And when he lost his job at the railroad station, one of the jobs he took up was he'd go to the cigar factory where they would roll cigars, and they would hire him to sit at the front of the factory and read the newspapers to the workers, and then afterwards novels to the workers. And from that, he picked this lifelong, first of all, he learned a lot, obviously, covering history as it was happening, and later reading the classics. But he also picked up this lifelong passion for reading and for learning, which years later he would share with me on the porch of our home as he smoked one of his 3 daily cigars.
Right.
In the porch of our home in Las Vegas. He would talk to me about history, and invariably that turned to politics.
And also, it wasn't an easy time for your father, who at 9 years old had to begin his work life and take care of younger siblings.
That's right. His mom died when he was only 9, and literally within hours or days he went to work, and he never stopped working. His first job I talk about was at a small little cafe just around the corner where he had found some money or a wallet, and he turned it in, and one of the guys playing dominoes there, it was owned by some Spaniards, accused him of stealing the wallet. And the owner chastised the guy and told him, "Don't accuse this kid, he's an honest kid. Did you see he turned the wallet over to you?" And he said, "Hey kid, do you want a job here bussing tables and helping out?" And that's where he started to work. And unfortunately, a few months later, he got fired for taking a chocolate bar without asking for permission. But just think about that. He was 9 years old, and instead of being at school, he was working, and he worked virtually until the time he passed away. That's a lot of work.
Amazing story. We've got a lot more to come. Also, we'll have more with Senator Marco Rubio as we look at how he got his start in life, and you'll also meet his wife, who is here tonight in our studio, as we continue to get to know this American son. Straight ahead.
We're calling it for you. At exactly 8 p.m. Eastern Time, an Associated Press reporter turned to me and spoke those words. Seconds later, the AP report flashed simultaneously on multiple television screens. After all these years of watching elections, it felt a little surreal to me to see my name with the words "projected winner" underneath my picture. But there it was right in front of me. Projected winner, Marco Rubio.
We are joined in studio by Florida Senator Marco Rubio and his family. Now, the senator became a household name during the 2010 election, and as we have already discussed, he's often mentioned when discussing the GOP vice presidential shortlist. But what many Americans don't know is how the senator got his start in politics. Now, for that answer, we sat down with a few of his closest friends and colleagues, including one by the name of Jeb Bush. Let's take a look.
When I first met Marco was in 1996, early in 96. We were all volunteering for the Bob Dole for President campaign. And Marco took us in immediately. And quickly we started to forge a good friendship, and also just started to see all those great qualities that Marco had back then, which have led him to where he is today.
During that campaign in 1996, Marco was already establishing himself as a leader in the campaign. He quickly ascended to the campaign manager for Dade County.
Some people acquire a thirst for public service at some point in their lives. I think Marco carried that willingness to be a servant from childhood.
We are all children of a powerful and great God.
Marco has real charisma. He has a joyful attitude. He is smarter than most politicians that I've ever met. He is eloquent. And all of this was pretty apparent from day one.
That the United States of America is simply the single greatest nation in all of human history.
In 1997, Marco decided to run for West Miami Commission, and Marco was lucky to have the support of then Mayor Rebecca Sosa, now County Commissioner.
He asked me, "You the mayor of West Miami, Rebecca Sosa?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he introduced himself, and he told me, "They told me that if you don't support me to run for commissioner, I won't win. Can you help me?" The next day, we were walking door to door, knocking in every house in West Miami. He became elected commissioner, which was an incredible moment in his life.
He ran for the state house in his early 20s, ran a very difficult primary, won by less than 100 votes, and began his career in the State House of Representatives, a brilliant one at that.
It was a race that everyone wrote him off. Everyone told him he couldn't win. Everyone said that the odds were too big. He was running against entrenched politicians. But with Marco, you always knew that he would outwork anyone else, that his passion and his intensity would translate to others. And that's what happened in that first House race and why he was able to win.
We served 4 years together in the legislature, and I was fortunate enough to serve side by side with him when he was Speaker of the Florida House.
When he became Speaker and he did his 100 ideas for Florida's future, he was able to go around the state listening to the voters, asking them what their concerns were. I think that's really what launched him, or the trajectory that launched him into the Senate race in 2010.
When Marco called me for seeking my advice about running for the Senate, I told him that first and foremost, he should pursue his dreams and not worry about all the political implications of whether he was going to win or lose. And I'm really proud of him. He won going away. I think it's spectacular he's in the United States Senate.
I think as far as Marco's political future, I've always thought, and I continue to think, the sky's the limit.
Someday, we're going to see young Marco Rubio be the first Hispanic president in the history of America.
He can go all the way.
God bless
Marco Rubio could be
God
president of the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Senator Rubio is back with us. And this keeps coming up, and we didn't plan this issue that people have confidence you can go as far as you want. Do you think about it at all?
Oh, we shouldn't, because the truth is that what I've learned in the time that I've been around politics is that people that get into a position planning to use it to catapult to something else almost always end up destroying themselves. The great example of someone who does it the right way is Jeb Bush that you had there. This is the guy who took over as governor of the state of Florida, really took on every difficult issue, certainly not the kind of thing you do if you want to stay popular. And I think at the end of Jeb Bush's career as governor, people, even those that didn't agree with him, respected him. I think what I learned, and I learned a lot from watching that example close up, as to the kind of leader I want to be in the Senate.
Well, it was interesting when the Senate seat, which you eventually ran for, opened up, you had a phone conversation with Jeb Bush, the governor, and you assumed he was going to run, and in that conversation, you write in the book that he suggested you run.
Well, when he decided not to run, I thought he was going to run. I was convinced that he was going to do it after I had met with him, and he kind of thought about it over the Christmas holiday, and when we came back, he said he wasn't going to do it, and he encouraged me to think about it. And it was the beginning of this process where we were very concerned about the future of our country. I desperately wanted the next U.S. Senator from Florida to be someone that was going to go to Washington, stand up to Barack Obama, and offer a clear alternative. But, at that time I wanted someone else to do it. I didn't want to have to go through the hard work that involved that. And it was my wife, Jeanette, that said to me, well,
don't give away the segment, because I'm going to let her confront you later in the program as she joins us. But you became Speaker of the House at a very young age. And it's interesting because you were able to balance the budget. Everyone viewed you as a leader. You're still a very young man. And after you gave up, when the outgoing speaker always gives a speech, and you write that you decided to say that God is real and he loves everyone who ever lived. We showed a clip of that. That was a moment that you made a conscious decision to do that. Why?
It was the end of my career in the House, and I wanted to leave people with something. And one of the things I wanted to leave them with is this real understanding that what happens here matters a lot, but what happens after here matters more. And you think it's important for you to use platforms like that to share with people these things. They don't have to agree with me, and I certainly don't try to impose my views on anybody. But my faith calls us to glorify God in everything we do, and to bring glory to Him in everything we do, including to verbalize that and to recognize that reality, that God is real. Whether people want to admit He's there or not, He's there.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back, and we continue with Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Much more coming up tonight, including his wife, who challenged him in a pretty big way. Straight ahead.
Even with all the challenges America faces, there is still no nation on earth with a brighter future. The fundamental source of our nation's greatness remains our people. And while their government and its leaders may be languishing, the American people have not diminished one bit. The job of our government is to make it easier for our people to do what they do better than any people in the history of the world.
And welcome back to this special edition of Hannity as we continue with Florida Senator Marco Rubio with his brand new book out. All right, you wrote something. Obviously, the issue of immigration is in the forefront of people's minds. And the president just deciding to do something that he said he could not do just a year ago. And that is, he basically, through executive fiat, has decided we're not going to enforce the immigration laws as they are currently written. You actually write in the book, it's very difficult for the Republicans to appeal to Hispanic voters for their support when people believe Republicans are trying to deport their loved ones. What did you mean by that?
Well, first of all, that's the message that the Democrats and the left drive against us, that somehow Republicans are anti-immigrant and as a result anti-Hispanic, and I think that's unfair. Number one, we do have a legitimate illegal immigration problem in this country. You know, this is the most generous country in the world on immigration. 1 million people a year immigrate to this nation, thereabout. No country in the world comes close to that figure. We have, I don't know, 50 million people waiting to come into this country legally, many of them from Hispanic nations, and are waiting in line and doing it the right way. So this is a country that's extraordinarily generous when it comes to its immigration policies. We have a very serious illegal immigration party, and it's a very legitimate thing to be concerned about that and to say that we can't be the only country in the world that doesn't have immigration laws and that doesn't enforce its laws. The other part of the immigration debate is that there are people in this country that are undocumented, and they came here in different ways. Some entered legally and their documents expired. Others were brought here as children. These are human beings. These are real people, the vast majority of whom are coming here in search of a better life. Some are coming here to escape some really desperate situations. And there's a human element to that our compassion calls to as well. But that has to be balanced with this concern that we have about illegal immigration. It's a difficult balance. And as I write in my book, I think the left often exploits that for political gain. Not everybody on the left and not everybody in the Democratic Party. But there's no doubt that the Democratic Party and the left use the immigration issue as a wedge issue in America.
Do you feel the president, by doing what he said he was not able to do and doing it this late in his presidency, is this more about what is constitutional versus the substantive issues of immigration in this case? Do you think he did it for political reasons?
I think no matter where you stand on the issue, even if you agree with the solution, you have to be outraged by the way he did it. We still have a republic here, and we still have a constitution, and as frustrated as we may get with Congress, we do have a congressional process, and that's how you create policy in America, not unilateral decisions by a president. I think the fact that he's done that actually is going to make it harder for us to come up with the kind of balanced decision that we're striving to accomplish in this country. And as far as whether it has anything to do with politics, absolutely it does. I mean, I don't think anyone doubts that. I don't think the White House could with a straight face deny it, and yet they are, but I don't know how they do it, because I think everyone sees it for what it is.
You said when the Arizona immigration law came into the public debate that you didn't like it. You always felt that this was a federal issue, not a state issue, and you wouldn't support it for Florida. But you said upon further examination and understanding what's going on in Arizona and the difficulty and the impact illegal immigration is having on the educational system, the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, that you felt that it was probably warranted in that case, and you would have probably supported it had you been from Arizona.
Well, Arizona's in a very unique position, and I think people need to understand what that state was facing and continues to face. The border with Mexico is not just about immigrants coming across the border. It's about human trafficking. It's about gun running. It's about drug violence. And people in Arizona are facing this, and they're facing a federal government that isn't doing enough about it. They're frustrated. And how does a people that's frustrated and scared about their public safety react? They act through their state legislature. And so, yes, Arizona has a constitutional right to do what it did. Now, I don't think that should be a national model. I think the better model would be for the federal government to do its job, to continue to improve security at the border, to do E-Verify, to modernize the legal immigration system. These are the sorts of things that we should be doing at the federal level. But if the federal government's not going to act, states like Arizona that are facing a public safety crisis are going to.
You wrote in the book you were kind of conflicted about President Obama. On the one hand, the night that he was elected, you were working on a local television station, and you felt you got caught up in the moment of the first African-American ever elected president, and you were emotional about it. On the other hand, you write about you felt beneath his centrist message, as you write, there was a decidedly left-of-center policy agenda that the country didn't need. You think in that sense he hid who the real Obama was during that campaign?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if he had run on where he really stood on some of these issues, he never would have been elected. I mean, why didn't he campaign on Obamacare when he was running for office 4 years ago? Why didn't he campaign on the stimulus package? Because he wouldn't have gotten elected if he ran on that. If he had run on a platform that included Obamacare, he would not have won in 2008. So absolutely he hid. And it's not like some idea that developed over time. They passed it, shortly after he got elected, he tried to do it. But here's the other thing I would say about it, and it touches upon what I think is one of the saddest things. Irrespective of whether you agree with the president or not on public policy, and certainly I don't and didn't, he had a very unique opportunity, unlike few Americans have ever had, to unite this country and elevate our political discourse beyond the kind of the low level that it's reached. He has absolutely walked away from that. Today he is divisive by design. He has completely abandoned any effort to elevate the political discourse. And all you see from the White House now are efforts to divide Americans against each other, rich versus poor, men versus women, even one group of Hispanic against another group of Hispanics. He's just like everybody else now. And I think that as much as anything else, that'll go down as part of this tragedy.
Do you think the Republican message on immigration, George Will said recently that if Mitt Romney doesn't get 31% of the Hispanic vote, he cannot win the election. Do you think that the Democrats have been successful as portraying conservatives and Republicans as anti-immigrant and alienated the Republican Party from, for example, in this case, the Hispanic community?
I think the Republican Party has been hurt by some of the rhetoric, but I also think it's been hurt from probably some unfair coverage, because I think to say that because you're concerned about illegal immigration, you're anti-immigrant is unfair. We're the pro-legal immigration party. What about the 50 million people that are waiting to immigrate legally here? No one ever talks for them. What about the people that come to my Senate office saying their mom or dad has been waiting in line for 10 years? What do we tell them? Come illegally, it's cheaper and quicker. On the other hand, when you talk to the Hispanic community, you have to understand immigration is not a statistic or a theory. They love somebody. They know somebody who's caught in this illegal immigration situation. And they understand the law has to be enforced, but they also have a deep personal affinity and compassion for a very real-life being who was suffering the consequences of a broken legal immigration system. So, yes, the immigration system, the immigration issue matters a lot in the Hispanic community.
All right, when we come back, you're going to meet the woman behind the man, Senator Marco Rubio's wife, Jeanette. She'll join us right here on the set tonight here on Hannity.
So many times I've tried to have it both ways. I've tried to be all in as a husband and father and all in as a politician. And I didn't do either job as well as I should have. I thought God was testing me again and giving me another chance to prove what I have often claimed but didn't always live up to, that being a husband and father was more important than being a senator.
And welcome back. I've been talking tonight to Florida Senator Marco Rubio, the author of the brand new autobiography, An American Son. Joining me now on stage, his better half, and we're happy to have his wife, Jeanette, joining us in studio. Welcome to the program. We got a nice audience out here. Everybody?
Thank you.
All right, you write in the book, he writes about you, you don't enjoy politics, and you had no desire to be a senator's wife.
No, I'm not a political person by no means.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously Marco was involved in politics for a very long time, while we were together. But, it's obviously when the Senate situation came into play, was something that I was a little, bit taken by, but ultimately I know how he wanted to make a difference, and so I supported it, and it was very, very.
Well, and then he goes further in the book. He really says you really hammered him a couple of times on the issue of politics. One had to do when he was considering running for the Senate, and you said, well, why don't you do it? In other words, because you were saying at the time, I wish somebody would do it. I wish somebody would do it. And it was you who confronted him and said, why don't you do it?
Well, yeah, because sit down and he would, get so frustrated when he would hear, especially when he would see some of the things that the governor at the time would do and say. And the way I guess things are going, you know, in our country, he, you know, I told him, I go, why don't you just do it? If you feel this strongly about it, just do it.
Yeah, but that's different from, because he also described you as a wife who would be happy. You wanted a husband and dad home at 6 o'clock for dinner every night. So you must have felt strongly as well that he could do a good job.
I did. I believed in him. I believe that he can make a difference. I believe that his passion for doing something, you know, for, you know, politically and I mean for people, I mean, actually, I believed in him, and so.
There was a couple of moments of indecision. One, you had not raised a lot of money, and you were thinking, all right, I don't have a chance in this race. He's got all the endorsements, he's got all the money, and you began to doubt that whether you should do it. And then you considered running for either governor or attorney general at the time.
Right.
What was going through your mind? Why you didn't want to lose? You even said you had.
I had doubt about how I could win. I mean, everything I knew about politics up to that point said I was going to lose. I mean, I was behind in the polls. I couldn't raise money. Everyone was endorsing him. I had never run statewide before. I mean, everything I had ever known about politics up until that point taught me that I was going to lose, and I was going to lose badly. And I didn't want to go through that, and I didn't want to put them through a year and a half of campaign for a cause that couldn't be won. But where I think Jeanette was really illustrative for me was she reminded me of why I wanted to be in this to begin with. This wasn't to be somebody. Was to do something. If you want to be somebody, then you run for the easiest office. And that's why, you know. Really,
because I remember when I first interviewed you and the first time we met, there was a point where nobody really knew who you were. You would not, it was kind of assumed that Charlie Crist would win that position.
No, that's right. And you know, and that gets to you too. And so I think what I had was about whether I could win, and quite frankly, was trying to figure out a way to save face, because I didn't want to be embarrassed in a humiliating loss after spending a year and a half chasing something that wasn't possible. But where at the end of the day, I'm glad that it happened that way. I consider it a blessing, because it forced me to ask myself, why are you in this? And early in this race, the only thing I had with me was my family, my principles, and the support of a handful of people around the state who, as they met me, believed that I could be a voice for what they wanted.
And you led the charge against him changing, you know, to the easier race.
Yeah.
That's what he writes, that you led that charge, even though you didn't really have a lot of interest in being a senator's wife. Why did you lead that charge? What did you see in him that made you say, I gotta put a little pressure on him?
Well, because he started it. I mean, he had already started the race. I mean, he was in. You know, I knew why he was trying to find the way out, and it wasn't because he didn't. It wasn't because of what he believed in. It was because of because he was seeing that it was starting to get hard, and so that challenge, to me, I believed wasn't a reason to get out of something that that you felt strongly about it. I mean, I think that everything in what you do or everything in life, what is good, is hard. You know, it's never easy. So
you thought you were going to be, you used the words humiliated and destroyed.
Yeah, I thought I'd lose by 30 points. I thought they'd spend all kinds of money against me to tell people how bad I was. I thought
and
it would.
They did.
Yeah, well, but I thought, you know, at the time I wouldn't have the money to even defend myself, and at the end, not only would I not be elected, I would struggle to find a job. I mean, who's going to hire a lawyer that just got smeared, for, you know, on television statewide? And I worried about those things, but I'm glad that it happened that way, because as I said in the book, and it was really a faith journey too, because, you know, it's not some, for God, it wasn't just about the politics. It was about me being more reliant on him. One of the hardest things that we face in our faith is, are we able to abandon ourselves to God and to his will, whatever that will may be. And in this race, I had nothing but faith left at the beginning, because there was nowhere else to win.
You talk about Jeanette writing you saying that I'll support anything you decide. I'm with you in this together with God. I love you. I believe in you, which was great. And you signed it me. I guess you assumed you knew it was from.
Yeah, I knew it was her.
But you do realize, and I'm looking at this a little more objectively perhaps, that you're making the argument that if you get a call for another job, that you've got to accept it. You do know that the exact thing you're laying out in the book here.
That's a nice try.
Yeah. Well, I hate when I get busted on that. All right. Well, I gave it my best shot, but we're going to take a break. We'll come back. More with Senator Rubio and his wife, Jeanette, as the special edition of Hannity continues. And as always, we're glad you're with us.
My parents relinquished their ambitions without resentment to make a comfortable and stable home for their children. They couldn't give us everything we wanted, but they made certain we had everything we needed. We were children of privilege, secure, happy, and loved.
And welcome back to Hannity as we continue with Florida Senator Marco Rubio, author of the brand new book, An American Son. And we're also joined by his wife, Jeanette. You guys had a really tough moment that you write about in your book. You got your family here. You have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, and your youngest boy.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you tell the story where you found him in a pool in your backyard.
Well, when Jeanette wasn't home, I was home making phone calls, and all of a sudden I heard the back ring. You know, you have an alarm at our house, and the door opens, it rings, and something in me told me go to the backyard just to keep track of Dominic. I couldn't find him in the playroom, and when I got there, I found him floating at the top of the pool. And pulled him out, and for a second he didn't breathe. Then he kind of vomited up the blood, the water, and then started crying. And obviously it was extremely scary. I mean, it affected me for days, just what could have been. But what it did is it also reminded me of how inconsequential all of this is, how in a moment all of it can change in a heartbeat. It was a very frightening moment. And
that's chilling. That's great that I don't know when you made the decision to put the alarm on. I guess every time somebody opens the door,
the door, it'll ring. Plus, it has this pool fence, and unfortunately, the people that did the yard that day left a little space open, just a little space.
All it takes is scary. You know, one thing is this goes back to the decision making, whether or not you're going to stay in the Senate race or you're going to go for Attorney General, and your encouragement for him to move forward. You wrote that something was gnawing at you. You felt ashamed that you had been tested with adversity and that you failed, that you were nothing like your grandfather, a disabled man who lost his job, nothing like your father, motherless, working since he was 9. Did you see that inner conflict going on in him?
No, I didn't. I mean, there were moments that I saw him conflicted when it regards to, you know, what the outcome of the, you know, of the race and everything was. But no, I mean.
It was really that you really felt that.
Yeah,
you really,
I did.
I mean, using the word ashamed and that's
because
hard.
if you think about if things went bad for me, I lost an election, but I get to come home and spend time with my family. That's the worst thing that would happen. You lose an election. If things went bad for my dad, you know, we wouldn't pay the bills at the end of the month. If things went bad for my grandfather, the kids wouldn't eat that night. I mean, that's a real test. I mean, that's real tough.
That's real
losing a race. I mean, that's not. And I just felt bad as I looked back at it. I said, you know, once again, God has tested me. Once again, He's asked me to have faith in Him and rely on Him. That it may not turn out the way the world wants it to turn out, but no matter what happens, it's what God's will is. And I failed, and it bothered me a lot.
Well, you didn't, because you made the right decision in the end, and you stuck with it, with obviously Jeanette's help. You say you're a proud member of the Tea Party. That struck me, because I notice a lot of people, they go to Washington and they want to distance themselves a little bit from their base. So I want to give you a chance. Why do you consider yourself a Tea Party senator?
Well, I've never self-anointed myself that. I can tell you that I'm very proud of my association with Tea Party groups in Florida and across the country. These are everyday Americans from all walks of life who are angry at both political parties because they see this country headed in the wrong direction and no one is doing anything about it, or not enough people are doing anything about it. I think that's been one of the most promising developments in modern American politics. It's brought a lot of energy and accountability in American politics. And despite all the negativity in the mainstream media about the Tea Party movement, 2.5 years later, it's still going strong. It's still helping to decide races around this country, because it's not an organization. It's a sentiment that's been there.
Senator Jeanette, congratulations on the new book, An American Son, which is really a quintessential American story.
Thank you.
We stand on the shoulders of our parents and grandparents, and we look forward to seeing your future. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Appreciate it. And that is all the time we have left this evening. Thanks to our studio audience, and I hope you all have a great night. Thanks for being with us.